And it was out of the blue. It was like a sort of 1-2-liner, and it just said, "The deal's off. My son and one of the directors in the business are going to do a management buyout."
So Dan, last year you did your first deal, and it was a whopper of a deal. It was an 8-figure deal,
yep.
Which I always say to people, aim high, think big. You did exactly that. I want to hear all about it. So first of all, tell us about the type of business it is.
So the business is a specialist plant hire business. So we basically have a fleet of trucks that do a thing called vacuum excavation. So we excavate soil by using a giant vacuum cleaner, in very simple terms.
Okay.
And it's a growing sector. There's a number of companies in it. I think it started in the UK in about 2005, but there's increasing demand for it. And unlike some sectors in construction, it's still very profitable.
So this is where trying to find the source of the water leak and digging up the high street with all these pipes that go back decades.
That's right.
And getting between them. Yeah. And then they put this big straw down.
It's like an elephant's trunk, basically.
Yeah, it is like an elephant's trunk. And they
arm.
suck out all the dirt.
That's right.
And this equipment is huge, and it looks very expensive.
It is. So a new one, 440,000. So they're very, very expensive. Unlike other plants, you really need it on the road working. You can't really have it off the road, waiting for repair or anything like that.
Because if it's not on the road, it's not
earning money, particularly if you're going down the road of leasing them. So they're very, very expensive. So one of the things that I bought from my past life, which when I look at them, is to treat them more like aircraft. Aircraft are phenomenally expensive. Any airline will tell you they're finished if the planes aren't in the air. So I've tried to sort of bring that culture into the sector.
So you sound very knowledgeable about vacuum excavation. So is that your background? It sounds like it.
No.
I'm
a corporate animal. So I'm 55. I spent most of my 20s in the military. I then had a very long and successful career with DHL. I finished with DHL in Bonn in 2006, right at the end of 2006. So that was the sort of logistics side of things in managing director roles, and I finished up as their global operations director. I had a brief 1-year stint helping a family member with a startup where I got a bloody nose and learned some lessons. I then had a stint with an entrepreneur in healthcare with a private healthcare business in a senior role, and then 6 years in financial services in a medical indemnity business. So I've crossed several sectors.
Yes.
I'd say all of them, almost without exception, were international. So I spent a long stint overseas, coming back to the UK in 2007. And all of the jobs involved transformational change.
Vacuum excavation, not the type of business that springs to mind for many people thinking about doing their first deal. Most people think about, I don't know, a digital marketing agency or a hairdresser. What led you to such a niche type of business?
I wasn't a good student of yours, I have to admit. And I did just about everything that you shouldn't do. So I didn't start straight away.
See, now you're admitting it.
Yes, exactly. So I didn't.
But it's cathartic though, isn't it? To get this off your chest.
But I'd recently left corporate life, so I didn't have that urgency at that point. I quite literally didn't care what I bought. So I'd moved sector several times. So I didn't mind what sector I was in. I was literally treating it as going out on a new adventure and finding something. So I was reasonably confident in my business skills. I just wanted to see what was out there. So I looked at all sorts of things. So I first went out. I actually did the hair salon route at the start. I did facilities.
Okay.
Then I did hair salons. And I sort of half-heartedly did it between the second session and the third one. And then in your third session, we had that fantastic presentation from, I forget his name, the chap in the South who's bought all those hair salons.
Oh, yes.
And so that sort of spurred me on. And I suppose the lesson I learned there was what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for you. So I must have done 1,500 letters or more to hair salons in the North. I had some very amusing conversations, but it really didn't gain any traction. But what it did do is because of the SIC code, I also looked at beauticians, which there wasn't much there. But I ended up meeting a woman who was I had to go meet her because she was making a lot of money running a nail bar. And I thought, you can't be making this much money running a nail bar. And sure enough, she was running training for a training company up in Liverpool. And that led me to look at a training company. Without going into it in detail, that fell through, mainly because it's regulated, that sort of government-funded training. And
So was that like apprenticeships or
yes,
NVQ or something?
That
Very good sector, by the way.
very
good sector.
But I was told right at the last minute, we were going to sign heads of terms. And the guy said, I've been awake all night trying to work out why this doesn't work. And I've just realized you're going to have to get some gearing in the business to buy me. And the government won't like that. That didn't work out. I think I looked at a timber yard at one point, but that came through a broker, which was a mistake. And then I also, through a broker, I got talking with a business in Manchester who do these sort of metal security bollards, the ones that go into the ground and the solid ones. Really good business, great owner, very profitable, all the right credentials. They were at the right stage of life to sell, et cetera, et cetera. The problem was it was through a broker. They were very difficult to deal with. So they had been persuaded the business was worth more than it was. I put an offer in, it fell through. And that was early 21, I think. And they've literally just come back to me. So they still haven't sold, funnily enough, through the broker. But that was a good business.
If you want to find out how to buy a business successfully, get your free business buying toolkit. The link is in the video description below.
So I went back to the drawing board and I actually said to myself, you've run big organizations. I've always been in big corporate roles. So I should be looking for something bigger. So I sat down and thought about that. And then I based my search and I started looking for businesses that were big on assets. The owners preferably were at the older end, so likely to be looking to retire, hopefully profitable businesses. And I wasn't that bothered what they were. So I was looking more at something that had some meat to it that you could leverage to buy the business, and started looking I suppose I was looking at 2 million to 10 million bracket, and sort of quite a wide one. So I set off with the letters. I got the first 1,000 list, and then I went through it. I spent 2 days going through it, just taking out the junk, which you easily build up in these lists. And I ended up with about 400 companies in this list. And I thought, well, to hell with it. I won't wait till I've got 1,000. I'll just send the first 400 letters. So out they went. And of those 400 letters, I got one reply, which was this business. So the business.
That's a pretty good hit rate.
That's pretty good. 1 in 400. and this was the business. And one of the lessons I learned from it is that the business is made up of two companies. I only hit one of those companies. I didn't hit both of them. It was just the one company where he kept all of his assets. That's the one that the search picked up. So the lesson from that is you can't be too specific. You've just got to get out there and get the letters out.
It's interesting that you spoke to one business and that was the business that you ended up buying. So tell me why it ticked the boxes.
I spoke to the owner on the phone, and it's hard to explain, but in that initial conversation, the guy mentioned his age, which was, I think he was 68. He talked a bit about his business. I think to say we hit it off would be an over-exaggeration, but we had a connection. I did something that I carried on doing with him, which is, for once in my life, I shut up and I listened to him.
Okay.
And I very quickly worked out that he was somebody of a certain age. He was ready to retire. He kind of admitted that he was doing it a bit late. So he definitely had the motivations. And by listening to him, he was telling me about the business, which he was very knowledgeable about. But there were limitations there in his understanding of business in general, I would say, compared with me.
So he had built a successful business through hard work, determination, putting in years, maybe decades of his life, and got there through that grit and determination rather than from any particular business knowledge.
So I think his son at some point in 2005 had recommended they try one of these machines from Germany. They were on a job in Sheffield, and they would have to have found a lot of labor to hand dig, which was becoming harder and harder to do. And so his son, who's an engineer, suggested they try one of these things, and it sort of took off from there. So it was a bit of luck. But I'd say he was typical of the sector. Nice man, but definitely ready to sell. I then arranged to go and meet him, and we went down and we had that conversation about numbers. And he was absolutely adamant that he was not going to give me a number. So I was in that bit thinking, well, the course says, Jonathan says,
because I always
don't
say,
give him a number, they've got to give you a number.
Offers. Yeah,
but something's got to give. So I thought, well, he talked a lot about the value of the assets, the value of these big excavators. They're not like normal plant. So most owners at the moment will buy one of those and it works for 10 years and beyond if you service it. Most of them are depreciated over 5 years. So they're still using them at 10 years. We've got them at 14 years. Now they're earning the same as one that's new. So the value of the assets he saw as being worth a lot more than they were on the balance sheet. So I was able to say to him, I said, well, John, I'm a businessman. I don't know anything about your business. So I can do a quick analysis on your balance sheet and your P&L and tell you what I think the business is worth. And I came in at a very low value because I just said, well, this is your asset value. So he's like, obviously, oh no, that's way off. He said, I was thinking of a figure of X or above going into an 8-figure sum. So I had my number then, like you taught. So that was the number I stuck with all the way through. And we agreed that number, and I think we agreed at the start, I said to him, you're going to have a deferred element. So I sort of said, looking at the value of your assets, the debtors, cash in the business, we'll probably do 80% up front, 20% deferred. We could do that. And he didn't like it, but he sort of accepted it.
I think it's very generous.
Yes. And then the next plan was to go down and sign heads of terms. And so I was looking just now in my diary back at the dates of this. So I met him I first spoke to him in May 2021. I've got a date in my diary that says go down to Doncaster to sign heads of terms on the 25th of June 2021. I didn't actually sign those heads of terms until December 2021.
Okay.
In the end, and I'll explain why. So I went down and he wanted to do things sort of in his way. So I was letting him do that. So we actually, although I explained to him heads of terms were not binding, he wasn't really buying into that. He wanted to push it down the road. So I was fine with that.
When you say push it down the road, do you mean get his solicitor involved?
Yes.
Okay.
So he needed, and the other thing,
needed reassurance.
The other thing I found out was he wasn't really that prepared as a seller. So he didn't have the right solicitor in place. He was using his own accountants who were not good. And so he really needed to get ready and get happy with me. And we started meeting at least monthly from then on in this hotel for good reason or no good reason. We just kept that communication going. But there was a hiccup in, I think it was the end of July. So we'd had this conversation. Now, the reason that I said 80-20 in terms of the split was because I felt the overall price was generous. I thought he was, we certainly weren't ripping him off, but it was a good price for the business.
Oh,
so business.
So you thought that it was a sensible price,
yeah,
and you didn't begrudge paying that price, and therefore you were more lenient on the terms because you felt the overall price was decent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, he then suddenly sent an email to me and he said, and there's another lesson in this, and it was out of the blue. It was like a sort of 1-2-liner, and it just said, the deal's off. My son and one of the directors in the business are going to do a management buy-in, and management buyout, and they're going to buy the business. So that's the route we're taking. Signed, owner.
Okay.
And that was that.
That must have been quite a
so that was quite a blow.
Disappointing.
It was.
moment.
It was. And I sent him an email back saying, well, that's very disappointing, but I understand. Good luck. And if you change your mind, let me know. And I sat on it for a week.
Buying a business is a roller coaster, which is why you need a lawyer who knows what he is doing. So why not use mine? His name is John Andrews, and you can find his contact details below this video.
So I thought, well, this is silly. I'll phone him up. So exactly a week later, I phoned him up and I said, John, I'm just phoning up because I should verbally say, thanks for all the work we've done. And if you change your mind, I think you've got a great business. And before I could finish with this blurb, he just goes, I have changed my mind. The deal's on. It's interesting, the psychology of that, because clearly the people who decided they'd like to buy the business had to go and talk to lenders and all the rest. And this comes down to this thing of you're only as good as the advice you're getting, especially on the first deal. So, one of the lessons is I would say 95% of people out there who like to talk about mergers and acquisitions, and I've been to London Business School, so I know a lot
Okay.
of people who know this stuff. Most of them don't know what they're talking about. They really don't, and they like to quote it, and that's including solicitors and accountants. So clearly they've been given some advice and all the rest. I could make some dangerous assumptions about the family dynamic in terms of what was going on there, but I suspect that the owner quite rightly was thinking, I just want to sell this business, get my money, and enjoy the rest of my years without being interfered with by members of family wanting help and with money and all the rest of
Yes.
it. So he
Yes.
clearly wanted that. That was my impression. So the deal was back on. The fly in the ointment was he said, I will only do it if you pay me up front, everything up front. So I thought, right, well, if I say no, the deal's off. If I say yes, then the process can run. So I said, okay, I said it'll be very difficult to do, but I will try and do it. So I agreed to it. We didn't sign heads of terms with that, but I said, I'm going to go and have to find some backers who are happy to do that. So we agreed on that and we kept meeting and we were going backwards and forwards. And then I had a very good finance broker with Clive Pacey.
So this is someone that we recommended
from your program. And he was very good for the contacts. He was also very good for keeping me sane because it's quite a lonely road going through all of those lenders with a really good business deal. Now we had the spreadsheet, we had the model, and it worked. Even paying up front, it worked. And you had plenty of assets and debtors there to protect any lender. The other thing that the owner had wanted, and I hadn't pushed back on, is very often the advice is you go in and you secure the price as a debt-free, cash-free price, and then it's clear. He didn't want to do that. He saw the cash in the business, which was, by the time we finished, was 40% of the consideration.
So just to put that sort of into numbers of 4 million plus.
Yeah. So he saw that as part of the deal, which is fine. So did I. But
so you saw it as you're buying the balance sheet. You're buying
Yeah.
a package, and there's some debt in there, and there's assets in there. So you've got your liabilities, you've got your assets, and you're paying a package price.
That's right. So the obvious thing is if the business is profitable and you're taking a long time to buy it, that cash is growing. That's going up all the time unless he's taking it out. So I suppose the lesson there was, don't try and show off your expertise in this matter by telling them what to do and this is how it works. Let them...
Because as long as they get the deal that they want, and he was happy with that deal, in fact, it was advantageous to you at the same time.
It was a win-win. Yeah. So it was fine. So that's the route we went down. And we found a lender. And we got to the end of the year and we signed heads of terms before Christmas. We both agreed we had to stop dithering around and sign the heads of terms, which we did.
And how long had he owned the business for?
The original business he'd founded in 1993. The brand name it's trading under at the moment started the first excavator came in 2005.
So nearly 30 years at that point. So I can understand how someone procrastinates slightly over the sale after 30 years.
Yeah. But he definitely thought it was on. It was something that was on. The bit you don't have any control over is the other side's deal team. Now, the owner had certain things they needed to do, one of which was to move some land that was worth $1.5 million out of the business into a holding company because it was nothing to do with the business and they weren't selling that. And that was a real alarm bell. And I remember the accountant saying to me, that's going to be a problem. That's not going to happen. So that was interesting. So that was going on in the background.
It's always the property element that take longer.
So that was going to be the delaying point. And the funny thing is it was done just before the deal went through, but it was never seen as the thing holding everything up a lot of the time. There were always other things. But actually, until that was done, nothing was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then there were lots of other things, but the owner had got himself a solicitor who then said he couldn't help him because he didn't have time. So then he recommended one of these big market town sort of solicitor firms, generalists, your classic, yes, we know M&A, but actually they don't.
Yeah.
And they proceeded to
They
rip him off.
specialize in divorces.
That's right.
You think you're getting a sale and purchase agreement,
That's
but
right.
you get a divorce instead.
So they were awful. And his accountants were like the magic roundabout. I mean, they were so slow and so. I mean, his accounts were terrible. They were all over the place. So that bit, I learned a lesson there. Try and get more involved with the owner and come together and to say, let's agree what our key milestones are and what each of our things are that we need to get done. So we can meet regularly and, assess it ourselves.
So it's agreeing a deal timeline and then keeping everyone on track and reeling them in when they get a little bit excessive. Yeah.
Because I would phone the owner up and I'd say, how's it going with X? And he'd say, oh, well, I think it's done. I'll phone my solicitor, and he'd phone the solicitor, and then he'd come out and he'd say, oh, the solicitor says it's nearly done. And I'd say, well, that means it's not done. And so there was a lot of that frustration. Over the weekend, I got a call from the owner, and he phoned me up, and he was really angry. And he'd obviously been speaking to someone, and he just said, I don't think this deal's going through. He said, you've led me down this path, and he was really very angry.
He mentally spent the money
Yeah, and it was really quite, it was quite a stressful weekend. So that last sort of week, 10 days took away for both of us. I had visions of shaking hands with the owner in front of an excavator, smiling and handing the keys over or something. But he left on the Friday. He was going to Spain on the Monday. So
it was all done virtually.
Yeah. So the deal was done, and then we got into the business.
So despite all the trials and tribulations, you ended up with a business with annual revenues roughly of...
The year to March a year ago was about 5.2 million. And I think its EBITDA was at about 40%, 38% of that.
Okay, so a very, very profitable extremely profitable business with lots of assets, lots of cash.
Yep.
Okay.
When I look back on it, I think the deal was never really not going to happen. I think by the time we got to Christmas and signed those heads of terms, neither of us were interested in anything other than it going through. It
Absolutely.
would have had to
you're both so far down the path you're committed.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, Dan, we're going to speak about what happened next in our next interview. Okay. But thank you for sharing your story. Pleasure. I'm glad you lived to tell the tale. It sounds like quite a roller coaster ride. But what an amazing deal, especially for your first one. Absolutely fantastic. Congratulations.
It all worked out good.
And I'll see you in part 2.
Great. Thank you.